Last Sunday, as my father and I sat on his back porch sharing stories and laughing until tears rolled down our cheeks, I couldn't help but think about the miracle that brought us here. You see, just 18 months ago, we hadn't spoken a single word to each other in over 8 years. 8 long, stubborn, painful years, where pride built a wall so high between us that I thought it could never come down. The last conversation we had ended with him telling me to leave his house and not come back. I walked out carrying my anger like armor, convinced I was better off without him. But here's what I discovered about the law of attraction that changed everything. It's not just about manifesting money or career success. It's about healing the deepest wounds in our hearts, even when everyone tells you it's impossible. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how I used the power of forgiveness, energy alignment, and unwavering faith to create the most beautiful miracle of my life, bringing my father back. I need to take you back to understand how deep this wound went. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, my relationship with my dad, Robert, was complicated. He was a traditional man, born in 1952, who believed in hard work, discipline, and keeping emotions locked away. I was his oldest son, and he had big expectations for me: lawyer, doctor, something respectable and stable. But I had different dreams. At 25, I wanted to be a musician. I had talent, passion, and this burning desire to create something meaningful with my life. When I told him I was leaving my job at the insurance company to pursue music full-time, the conversation exploded. I can still remember every detail of that night. We were sitting in his small kitchen, the yellow light from the overhead fixture casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. His coffee mug sat untouched between his hands, steam rising like the tension in the room. "Marcus, this is the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "You have a good job, benefits, a future, and you want to throw it all away to play guitar in bars?" The disappointment in his eyes cut through me like a knife, but I was young, stubborn, and convinced he just didn't understand. "Dad, this isn't just playing guitar. This is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life." He slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee mug jump. "Calling? Son, a calling pays the bills. A calling puts food on the table and provides for a family. This music thing is a hobby, not a life." That's when I said the words that would haunt me for years. Maybe if you had followed your dreams instead of settling for a mediocre life, you'd understand what passion feels like. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father's face change, saw the hurt flash across his features before it hardened into something cold and distant. He stood up slowly, walked to the front door, and opened it. "I think you should leave," he said quietly. "Dad, I didn't mean—" "Get out, Marcus, and don't come back until you learn some respect." I walked out that door carrying my pride and my anger, but leaving behind a piece of my heart. I told myself I didn't need his approval, that I was better off without his negativity. But deep down, I knew I had wounded him as much as he had wounded me. The next 8 years were a masterclass in stubborn pride. We lived in the same city, but we might as well have been on different planets. My mother became the messenger between us, carrying updates like a diplomatic courier. "Your father asks about you," she'd say during our monthly phone calls. "Well, he knows where to find me," I'd reply, the bitterness still fresh even years later. Meanwhile, my music career had its ups and downs. I played in local bands, did some session work, even had a few songs placed in independent films. It wasn't the massive success I dreamed of, but it was enough to live on, enough to prove to myself that I could make it work. But every small victory felt hollow without my father there to share it. The worst part was the ripple effect. Family gatherings became awkward dances of avoidance. Holidays were split between visiting him and visiting me. My younger sister Sarah bore the burden of maintaining relationships with both of us, often breaking down in tears over the phone about how much our feud was tearing the family apart. But pride is a powerful drug. Every time I thought about reaching out, that voice in my head would remind me, he's the one who kicked you out. He's the one who should apologize first. The wake-up call came on a rainy Tuesday in October 2021. I was 33, sitting in my small apartment in Tempe, scrolling through social media while my morning coffee grew cold. That's when I saw a post from my cousin Jake. Prayers for Uncle Robert. The doctors found something concerning, and we're all hoping for the best. My heart stopped. I stared at those words until they blurred, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. My father was sick, possibly seriously, and I had no idea. 8 years of silence, and I was finding out about his health crisis through a Facebook post. I called my mother immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Mom, what's wrong with Dad? Jake posted something." "Oh, Marcus," she sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "The doctors found a spot on his lung. They're doing more tests this week. He asked me not to tell you because he didn't want you to feel obligated to visit." The word obligated hit me like a physical blow. After 8 years, my own father thought I'd only visit him out of obligation. The realization of how far we'd drifted, how much damage our pride had done, crashed over me like a wave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about time, how finite it is, how precious it is, and how much of it I'd wasted. I thought about all the conversations we'd never had, all the moments we'd missed, all the ways we could have supported each other through life's challenges. But more than anything, I felt helpless. How do you bridge an 8-year gap? How do you heal wounds that have had nearly a decade to fester? How do you reach out to someone who thinks you don't care? That's when the universe put exactly what I needed right in front of me. I was walking through Barnes & Noble the next day trying to distract myself when a book literally fell off the shelf and landed at my feet. I know how that sounds, like something out of a movie. But I swear it's true. The book was The Power by Rhonda Byrne. I'd heard of The Secret before, but I'd always dismissed it as New Age nonsense. I was a practical guy, a musician who dealt in concrete things like chord progressions and sound waves. But standing there in that bookstore, holding a book that had literally fallen into my path while my father was facing a potential cancer diagnosis, I felt like the universe was trying to tell me something. I bought the book and devoured it that same night. Then I ordered The Secret and Ask and It Is Given by Esther and Jerry Hicks. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading about the law of attraction, about how our thoughts and emotions create our reality, about how we can deliberately attract what we want into our lives. But here's what really caught my attention. It wasn't just about manifesting material things. These books talked about healing relationships, about forgiveness, about how changing your internal vibration could literally change the circumstances of your life. There was a particular passage in The Power that stopped me cold. Love is not weak, feeble, or soft. Love is the positive force of life. Love is the cause of everything positive and good. Everything you want to be, do, or have comes from love. I realized that beneath all my anger and hurt, what I really wanted was love. I wanted my father's love, his approval, his presence in my life. And if the law of attraction was real, if thoughts and emotions could create reality, then maybe, just maybe, I could use these principles to heal our relationship. I started small, following the guidance I was reading. Every morning I would sit quietly for 10 minutes and visualize my father and me having a conversation. Not the angry, hurtful conversation from 8 years ago, but a new one, a loving one. I would picture us sitting on his back porch, the desert sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I would imagine him asking about my music, really listening to my answers, maybe even being proud of what I'd accomplished. I would visualize us laughing together, sharing stories, bridging the years of silence with understanding and forgiveness. At first, these visualizations felt forced, almost silly. The hurt and anger were still so present, that imagining a loving reconciliation felt like fantasy. But I kept at it, day after day, because I had nothing else to lose. I also started working on forgiveness, not just forgiving him, but forgiving myself. I wrote letters that I never sent, pouring out all my hurt, anger, and regret onto paper. I wrote about the young man I'd been, so sure of himself and so quick to judge. I wrote about the father I'd wanted him to be and the son I wished I'd been. The most powerful practice I discovered was something I read about in a Joseph Murphy book: revising the past. Instead of replaying that terrible night over and over with all its pain and anger, I would imagine it differently. I would picture myself being more understanding, him being more supportive. I would rewrite our last conversation with love instead of hurt. I know it sounds strange, but something started shifting inside me. The tight knot of anger that I'd carried for 8 years began to loosen. I found myself remembering good times with my father, teaching me to ride a bike, taking me to baseball games, the way he'd beam with pride when I played piano at family gatherings. But the process wasn't smooth. There were days when the old hurt would surge back with a vengeance, when I'd catch myself thinking, why should I be the one to fix this? He's the one who threw me out. About 3 weeks into this practice, I had what I can only describe as a breakdown. I was in the middle of my morning visualization when suddenly, instead of seeing my father and me reconciling, I saw him at his funeral. I saw myself standing at his graveside, knowing that our last words had been spoken in anger, that we'd wasted years we could never get back. I broke down sobbing right there on my meditation cushion. The grief wasn't just about our fight. It was about time, about mortality, about all the ways pride and stubbornness steal the most precious things from our lives. But even in that moment of despair, I felt something else: determination. I wasn't going to let pride win. I wasn't going to let fear of rejection keep me from trying. If the law of attraction was about aligning your vibration with what you want to create, then I needed to vibrate at the frequency of love, not hurt. I deepened my practice. Every morning, I would spend 20 minutes in what I started calling my love sessions. I would begin by getting into a state of gratitude, thinking about all the good things in my life. Then I would send love to my father, imagining it as a golden light surrounding him, healing any pain or illness in his body. I started keeping a gratitude journal specifically focused on my father. Every day I would write down 3 things I was grateful for about him, even if they were from decades past. I'm grateful Dad taught me to be persistent. I'm grateful for the work ethic he instilled in me. I'm grateful for the way he provided for our family. This practice started changing something fundamental in my perception. Instead of seeing him as the man who had rejected my dreams, I began to see him as a man who had worked hard his entire life to provide for his family, who had his own dreams and disappointments, who was probably just scared that his son was making a mistake. I also started what I learned was called mental diet, monitoring my thoughts about the situation. Whenever I caught myself thinking angry or resentful thoughts about my father, I would stop and consciously choose a loving thought instead. It was like training a muscle, and at first, it was exhausting. But gradually, it became more natural. The most powerful technique I discovered was something I read about in Neville Goddard's work: living in the end result. Instead of focusing on how broken our relationship was, I started living as if it were already healed. I would talk about my father with love and warmth, as if we were close. I would make plans in my mind that included him. I would even set aside time in my schedule for the phone calls I imagined we'd have. About 6 weeks into this practice, something interesting started happening. I began noticing what I now understand were synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seemed to be pointing me toward my father. I would be walking through the grocery store and suddenly hear his favorite song playing over the speakers. I'd be driving and see a license plate with his initials. I'd open a random book and find a passage about fathers and sons. These might sound like coincidences to you, but they felt like messages to me, like the universe was confirming that I was on the right path. The most significant sign came in early December. I was at a coffee shop, working on some new music, when an older gentleman at the next table started talking to his companion about his son who was a musician. I couldn't help but overhear as he said, "I was so worried about him choosing such an unstable career, but you know what? He's happier than I've ever seen him. Sometimes our kids know things we don't." I looked up, and the man looked exactly like an older version of my father. Same build, same graying hair, same weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup. He caught me staring and smiled, and for a moment, I could have sworn I was looking into my father's eyes. That night I had a dream about my father. We were sitting in his kitchen again, but this time the conversation was different. He was asking me to play something on an old acoustic guitar, and as I played, he was smiling with genuine pride. When I woke up, I could still feel the warmth of his approval, and I knew something had shifted. Around this time, my mother called with an update on my father's health. The additional tests had come back, and thankfully, the spot on his lung was benign. Just scar tissue from an old infection. The relief I felt was overwhelming. But it also brought up a difficult question. Should I reach out now that the health scare was over? Part of me wanted to use his illness as an excuse to contact him, but that didn't feel authentic. If I was going to rebuild our relationship, it needed to be based on love, not fear or obligation. I decided to continue my practices and trust that the right opportunity would present itself. This was perhaps the hardest part of the whole process, the waiting. When you're actively working to manifest something, there's a tendency to want to force the outcome, to push and manipulate circumstances to make things happen. But everything I was reading emphasized the importance of allowing, of trusting the process and letting the universe orchestrate the how and when. So I continued my daily visualizations, my gratitude practices, my mental diet of loving thoughts, and I waited. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. It was December 18th, about 3 months after I'd started my practices. I was performing at a small venue in downtown Phoenix, just me and my guitar, playing some original songs for a crowd of maybe 30 people. I was in the middle of a song I'd written about forgiveness when I looked up and saw a familiar figure in the back of the room. My heart nearly stopped. There, standing by the bar with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, was my father. I almost stumbled over the lyrics, but somehow managed to finish the song. My hands were shaking as I set down my guitar and announced a short break. I didn't know what to do. Should I approach him? What if he left? What if this was just a coincidence and he didn't even know I was performing? But as I stepped off the small stage, he began walking toward me. Each step felt like an eternity. When he reached me, we stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. 8 years of silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things we'd never said. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was softer than I remembered. "That was a beautiful song, son, about forgiveness." I could barely find my voice. "Dad, what are you doing here?" He looked down at his hands, and I noticed they were trembling slightly. "Your mother mentioned you were playing tonight. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about us, about how things ended." The moment felt surreal, like a scene from the visualizations I'd been practicing for months. But this was real. My father was here, he was talking to me, and he was opening the door to reconciliation. "I've been thinking about us too," I managed to say. He nodded, looking around the small venue. "You know, I never really understood your music before, but listening to you tonight, you have something special, Marcus. You always did. I was just too scared to see it." Those words, the validation I'd been seeking for 8 years, hit me like a wave. But more than validation, I heard something else in his voice: regret, love, and a vulnerability I'd never seen from him before. We talked for 2 hours that night, sitting in a corner booth of the venue after everyone else had gone home. We talked about the fight, about the years of silence, about all the things we'd missed in each other's lives. He told me about his fear that I'd struggle financially, about how his own father had crushed his dreams of being a mechanic because it wasn't respectable enough. "I see now that I was just passing on the fear," he said, his eyes wet with tears. "I didn't want you to experience disappointment, so I tried to steer you toward safety, but I ended up pushing you away instead." I told him about my journey over the past 3 months, about the books I'd read, the practices I'd been doing, and how I'd been working on forgiveness and love. I told him about the visualization where I'd seen us talking on his back porch, and he smiled. "Funny you should mention that," he said. "I've been sitting on my back porch a lot lately, thinking about you, wondering if you'd ever want to talk to an old fool who was too proud to admit he was wrong." The synchronicity wasn't lost on me. While I'd been visualizing us reconciling on his porch, he'd been sitting on that same porch thinking about me. That night, we made plans to have dinner the following weekend. As we hugged goodbye, the first physical contact we'd had in 8 years, I felt something I can only describe as a miracle. Not just the miracle of our reconciliation, but the miracle of how the universe had orchestrated it. I had been focusing on love, forgiveness, and healing, and somehow those vibrations had reached him across the years of silence. The dinner that weekend was the beginning of a completely new relationship between my father and me. It wasn't just a return to how things were before. It was better. We were both older, more mature, and more aware of how precious our connection was. He started coming to my shows regularly, sometimes bringing friends and proudly introducing me as my son, the musician. He even bought one of my CDs and played it for his poker buddies. The pride in his voice when he talked about my music was everything I'd dreamed of for years. But the most beautiful part of our reconciliation was how it rippled out into the rest of our family. Christmas that year was the first time in 8 years that our whole family was together. Sarah cried when she saw us joking around in the kitchen, and my mother kept stopping to watch us with this look of pure joy on her face. We established new traditions, Sunday dinners at his house, where we'd sit on that back porch and talk about everything from music to philosophy to his childhood stories I'd never heard before. He started sharing parts of himself he'd never revealed when I was younger, and I began to understand him not just as my father, but as a complex human being with his own dreams, fears, and struggles. Looking back on this experience, I realized that the law of attraction worked in ways I never could have anticipated. I thought I was trying to manifest a phone call or a chance encounter. Instead, the universe delivered something much more profound, a complete transformation of our relationship. The key wasn't trying to change my father or manipulate circumstances to force a reconciliation. The key was changing myself, my vibration, my thoughts, my emotional state. When I shifted from anger and hurt to love and forgiveness, when I started seeing my father through the lens of compassion instead of resentment, somehow the external world shifted to match that internal change. I learned that forgiveness isn't about condoning harmful behavior or pretending that hurt didn't happen. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment so that love can flow again. When I forgave my father, I wasn't just healing our relationship. I was healing myself. The most profound realization was that the reconciliation I'd been visualizing was already happening on an energetic level long before that night at the venue. Every day that I sent love to my father, every morning that I chose gratitude over resentment, every time I revised our past with understanding instead of judgment, I was building a bridge between us that existed beyond physical space and time. Interestingly, once our relationship healed, my father's health improved dramatically. Remember that lung scare that had initially motivated me to start this journey? Not only was it benign, but his overall health and energy seemed to improve significantly in the months following our reconciliation. His doctor commented on how much more vibrant and positive he seemed during his follow-up appointments. My father started taking better care of himself, exercising more, eating healthier, and most importantly, smiling more. It was as if healing our relationship had removed a burden he'd been carrying, allowing his body to heal as well. This taught me another lesson about the law of attraction. Sometimes what we think we're manifesting, a healed relationship, has ripple effects that touch every area of life: health, happiness, family harmony. When we align with love and forgiveness, we create space for healing on every level. Our reconciliation also transformed my music in unexpected ways. The songs I wrote after we reconnected had a depth and emotional resonance that hadn't been there before. Music became a bridge between us. He would suggest song topics based on stories from his past, and I would translate them into melodies and lyrics. One of the most special moments was when he asked me to teach him to play guitar. At 70 years old, he wanted to learn the instrument that had initially driven us apart. We spent hours together with him, fumbling through chord changes while I patiently corrected his finger positions, both of us laughing at the role reversal. He never became a great guitarist, but watching him struggle with something I made look easy gave him a new appreciation for my skill and dedication. And teaching him gave me a new appreciation for his willingness to step outside his comfort zone and try something new, just to connect with me. The healing between my father and me created a ripple effect throughout our entire family. My sister Sarah, who had spent years being the intermediary between us, finally felt free to enjoy both relationships without walking on eggshells. Family gatherings became celebrations instead of diplomatic missions. My mother, who had carried the burden of maintaining connections with both of us, seemed to age backward once she saw us together again. The stress lines around her eyes softened, and she started laughing more freely than I'd heard in years. Even my extended family noticed the change. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had witnessed our rift and its impact on family dynamics began sharing their own stories of forgiveness and reconciliation. It was as if our healing had given others permission to mend their own broken relationships. About a year after our reconciliation, my father asked me to explain the books I'd read and the practices I'd used to work on forgiveness. He was curious about the law of attraction, though he was skeptical about what he called all that spiritual stuff. I shared some of the simpler concepts with him, the idea that focusing on what you're grateful for brings more things to be grateful for, that holding on to anger hurts you more than the person you're angry with, that our thoughts and emotions influence our experiences in ways we might not fully understand. To my surprise, he was more open than I'd expected. "You know," he said, "when I was sitting on that porch thinking about you all those months, I kept imagining what it would be like if we could talk again. Maybe there's something to this stuff after all." He started his own simple practice, spending a few minutes each morning thinking about things he was grateful for and consciously choosing to focus on positive thoughts about the people in his life. While he never became a full convert to the law of attraction philosophy, he acknowledged that these practices made him feel better and seemed to improve his relationships with everyone around him. The healing with my father also affected my music career in ways I never anticipated. The emotional breakthrough I'd experienced gave my songwriting a new authenticity and depth. Songs about family, forgiveness, and second chances resonated with audiences in a way my earlier material hadn't. I started getting invited to perform at events focused on healing and reconciliation. Other musicians began reaching out to share their own stories of family estrangement and asking for advice. Without intending to, I had become a resource for people struggling with similar relationship challenges. This led to opportunities I never could have imagined. Writing and recording songs for a documentary about family reconciliation, being invited to speak at conferences about the power of forgiveness, and even starting a small workshop series called Healing Through Harmony, where I taught people to use music as a tool for emotional healing. My morning practice evolved significantly after the reconciliation. Instead of focusing on manifesting the relationship with my father, I expanded to sending love and gratitude to all the important people in my life. I began each day by imagining golden light surrounding my family members, friends, and even people I'd had conflicts with. This practice became a foundation for how I approached all relationships. When conflicts arose, instead of immediately reacting with hurt or anger, I would remember the lessons from my father reconciliation, that love is more powerful than ego, that understanding is more healing than being right, and that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. I also started using the visualization and mental revision techniques for other areas of my life: my music career, my health, my friendships. While the reconciliation with my father was the most dramatic manifestation I experienced, I began to see how these principles were working in subtler ways throughout my life. 3 years later, the effects of that reconciliation continued to unfold in ways I never anticipated. My father and I now have the close relationship I'd always wanted but never thought possible. We talk regularly, share meals weekly, and have created new memories that have healed the old wounds. But the impact goes beyond just us. Our story has inspired other family members to heal their own rifts. My cousin Jake, who had posted that initial Facebook message about my father's health scare, reached out to his own estranged brother after witnessing our reconciliation. My sister used similar techniques to heal a relationship with a former best friend. The tools and techniques I learned during those 3 months of focused intention have become a permanent part of how I navigate life. I've shared them with friends, taught them in workshops, and incorporated them into my music. What started as a desperate attempt to heal one relationship has become a way of living that prioritizes love, forgiveness, and conscious creation. The most profound realization from this entire experience is that the law of attraction isn't just about getting what you want. It's about becoming who you need to be to have what you want. To manifest a loving relationship with my father, I had to become someone capable of loving without conditions, forgiving without guarantees, and opening my heart despite the risk of being hurt again. The 8 years of estrangement weren't wasted time. They were preparation time. I needed to mature, to develop emotional tools, to understand the deeper principles of love and forgiveness before I could create the healing we both needed. When I was 25 and angry, I wasn't ready for the relationship we have now. But at 33, having done the inner work, I was. This taught me that sometimes what looks like a delay in manifestation is actually perfect timing. The universe wasn't withholding the reconciliation from me. It was preparing both of us to receive it in the most beautiful and lasting way possible. My father's health has remained excellent in the years since our reconciliation. He's now 73 and more active than he was in his 60s. He attributes much of his vitality to the joy of having his family whole again, and his doctors continue to be amazed by his energy levels and positive outlook. He's also developed his own spiritual practice, though he'd never call it that. He reads books about positive thinking, practices gratitude daily, and has even started volunteering at a local community center where he helps other seniors navigate family conflicts. He tells me that our reconciliation taught him that it's never too late to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. The songs that came out of this experience have become some of my most requested and beloved pieces. Second Chances, the song I was performing the night my father showed up at the venue, has been recorded by several other artists and has touched thousands of people dealing with their own family estrangements. But the most special musical moment came last Christmas, when my father surprised me by performing a song he'd written himself, a simple, heartfelt piece about a father's love for his son and his regret over lost time. He performed it at our family Christmas gathering, accompanying himself on the guitar I'd taught him to play. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, including my own. The man who had once dismissed my music as impractical had written and performed his own song, pouring his heart into lyrics and melody just as I'd been doing for years. In that moment, I understood that our reconciliation had healed something even deeper than our relationship. It had freed both of us to express our authentic selves. People often ask me if I really believe that the law of attraction was responsible for the reconciliation with my father, or if it was just a series of coincidences. My answer is always the same. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that when I changed my internal state from hurt and anger to love and forgiveness, my external reality shifted to match. Whether you believe in energy, vibration, and conscious creation, or simply in the power of positive thinking and emotional healing, the results speak for themselves. The relationship I have with my father today is better than anything I could have imagined during those 8 years of silence. But here's what I find most miraculous. The reconciliation wasn't just about getting my father back. It was about discovering my own power to create love, healing, and connection in my life. It was about learning that forgiveness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. It was about understanding that we are not victims of our circumstances, but conscious creators of our experience. Now, 3 years later, I wake up every morning grateful for what I call the daily miracles. The text messages from my dad sharing something funny he saw on the news, the Sunday dinners where we laugh until our sides hurt, the way he lights up when he talks about my music to his friends, the hugs that last just a moment longer than they need to because we both remember what it felt like to live without them. These might seem like small things to someone who's never lost a parent relationship, but to me, they're pure magic. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of connection is a miracle that exists because I chose love over hurt, forgiveness over resentment, and faith over fear. If you're listening to this story and you have your own broken relationship, whether it's with a parent, child, sibling, or friend, I want you to know that healing is possible. It may not look exactly like what you expect, and it may not happen on your timeline, but love has a power to create miracles that defies logic. The tools I used aren't complicated or mysterious. Daily gratitude, loving kindness meditation, forgiveness work, visualization, and choosing love over ego. These are simple practices that anyone can do. But their power to transform lives is extraordinary. You don't have to wait for the other person to make the first move. You don't have to wait for them to apologize or change. You can begin the healing right now, right where you are, by changing the energy you bring to the relationship. When you shift from hurt to love, from judgment to understanding, from anger to compassion, you create space for miracles to occur. I promise you this. If you commit to doing the inner work, if you choose love over ego day after day, if you trust the process even when you can't see the results, the universe will surprise you with its generosity. Your miracle may not look exactly like mine. It may be a phone call, a letter, a chance encounter, or something even more beautiful than you can imagine. But whatever form it takes, it will be perfect for you, perfectly timed and perfectly aligned with your highest good. The same power that brought my father and me back together is available to you right now. All you have to do is believe, trust, and take the first step toward love. As I sit here sharing this story with you, my father is in the next room, reading a book about positive thinking while my mother prepares dinner. In a few minutes, we'll sit around the same kitchen table where our relationship nearly ended 8 years ago. But this time, we'll be sharing stories, laughter, and the kind of love that comes from forgiveness and second chances. This is the power of the law of attraction in its purest form. Not getting what you want, but becoming who you need to be to have what you want. Not forcing circumstances to change, but changing yourself so completely that circumstances have no choice but to reflect your new reality. My name is Marcus, and today I'm living proof that no relationship is too broken to heal. No silence too long to break, and no heart too hurt to love again. The universe is always listening, always responding, always ready to deliver miracles to those who align themselves with love. The question isn't whether miracles are possible. The question is, are you ready to receive yours? If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own power to create healing and love in your life, I want you to do something right now. Think of someone you need to forgive. Maybe it's a family member, an old friend, or even yourself. Close your eyes for just a moment and send them love. Don't worry about whether they deserve it or whether they'll ever know. This isn't about them. It's about you choosing love over hurt. Now I want you to comment below and simply write, "I choose love." Don't explain your situation. Don't share the details of your pain. Just make that declaration to the universe and to yourself. I choose love. Let that be your commitment to healing, your first step toward your own miracle. And if you believe that love can heal anything, that forgiveness can create miracles, and that it's never too late for a second chance, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Sometimes the story that changes someone's life is just one share away from reaching them. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about the power of love, forgiveness, and conscious creation. Hit that notification bell because I share new stories of transformation and hope every week. Remember, the same universe that brought my father and me back together is conspiring to bring healing into your life right now. The only question is, are you ready to let it happen? Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing in the power of love. And thank you for being part of a community that chooses healing over hurt, forgiveness over resentment, and miracles over limitations. Until next time, keep choosing love, keep believing in second chances, and keep trusting that your miracle is on its way. I love you all. God bless.